Hi, I'm Peter James, and I'm a nature photographer who photographs exclusively Washington State. My earliest memories are of exploring the woods and playing in the water, and that spirit of adventure and love for nature still guide me in everything I do. All of my photographs represent nature at its peak beauty with no signs of mankind, except for an occasional boat. The majority of the places I photograph are wilderness locations that most people only get to see on rare occasions, and many will never see. It's my job to enhance people's lives by bringing the extreme beauty of these inspiring places and the feeling of these once-in-a-lifetime experiences into their daily lives. I want my photography to help you feel happier and more alive, so I'm sharing some inside information with you here to help you better understand what I do and why I do it. I was born and raised in Michigan, which is an amazing state too, with a lot of gorgeous nature, especially around the Great Lakes. But it also gets really cold in the winter, and for about 4 months of the year, you can't really spend time outside. And I'm one of those people that loves to be out in nature all the time. So after I graduated photography school in 1997, I moved to Colorado. And Colorado is absolutely gorgeous too, but it was too dry for me. There's really not the lakes and the water that I was used to. So I packed up everything I had in my truck and I spent about 3 months traveling around the west side of the country looking for the perfect place for me to settle down and to do my photography. Well, I ended up in Washington State. I often say that Washington State is like Michigan and Colorado had a baby. There are literally mountain islands here. There's tens of thousands of small lakes. There's the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea inland, and there's the gorgeous Olympic coastline, which is one of the most phenomenal places to watch a sunset. My style is very warm and sunny, which, if you're familiar with Washington State, you know we have our fair amount of gray, rainy days here too. So I really love to celebrate the days where we have the sunshine and bring that warmth and the sun and the color into people's homes and businesses around the state and around the whole world. It took me over 10 years of living in Washington State to get to know the area well enough to know the right places to go at the right time to get these kind of photographs. So I've chosen to just photograph Washington State because it's such a diverse state. There's so much to see, there's so much to explore, and there's so much variety here. But also, I don't want to travel the world and go to the same spots all these other photographers have gone, taking the same photos over. I want to create unique images. And because I'm limited to just this one state, it makes me explore more and really get to know the land and get to know the timing and the lighting and when the wildflowers bloom where. And I have a more intimate and personal relationship with my subject because I get to know it better. I also have a family, so I don't like to be gone more than 4 to 6 days on a photo trip. It's great to be able to get home every week and be back with my family and to help run my gallery. I also don't want to have the carbon impact of taking flights around the world to do photography. For me, protecting and restoring nature is just as important as celebrating its beauty. Part of why I choose metal prints for my photos is because they're made of recycled aluminum and use dyes instead of chemicals. So they're better for the environment, and they also last much longer than traditional photo prints. For every metal print I sell, I make a donation that plants 100 trees. Not only does that make my process carbon negative, but the trees I'm helping to plant are restoring functioning ecosystems, which are the source of clean air, fresh water, foods and medicines, as well as home to an amazing variety of wild animals. You can learn all about where and how my trees are planted by clicking the link above. Traveling locally has an impact too, so I offset that by making a donation equal to 10% of my fuel costs to tree planting projects right here in Washington State, which makes all my photo trips carbon negative while helping keep Washington cool, green, and beautiful. And in addition to my own tree planting donations, together with my wife Ima, I've co-founded the Trillion Trees campaign, which is an educational and fundraising campaign that aims to inspire people around the world to plant 1 trillion trees. So I'm generally traveling in my truck camper, which allows me to get to my destination the night before and wake up in the place that I'm gonna hike that day. Most of my trips are day hikes, and I'll hike all day long and then photograph the sunset out on the trail and hike back in the dark. So having my bed waiting for me in the parking lot is really helpful. It lets me get a good night's sleep and then the next morning wake up and drive to my next location. I also love to backpack when I can. And there's nothing like waking up high in the Alpine mountains or out on the Olympic coast and getting those sunrise shots you could never get if you weren't camping there. I choose to print all of my photographs as metal prints because this medium has such a vibrancy to it. It looks so much more real than any other photographic prints I've ever seen. The metal prints are a sheet of recycled aluminum with a special coating on it that is essentially a white backing layer with a thin layer of what you could think of as clear gel. And the dyes are heat transferred at 700 degrees into that gel layer and then are suspended in this thin layer. It dries completely waterproof and scratch resistant, so they don't need to be protected under glass or inside any kind of frame. And the visual effect is that the light goes through that suspended dye, hits the white backing, and goes back through the dye before it hits your eye. So it gives it a little bit of a 3D effect, and it really catches the light and makes it look luminous. And my goal with my photography is to help people feel like they're really there, to feel like they're at these locations, looking at them in person. And I get this feedback over and over in the gallery, people saying, these photos just look so real. And that's always my goal. Now, it's tricky to actually take a photograph that looks real. You've probably experienced this by taking a picture and going, yeah, doesn't really look like what I experienced. So the camera sees light very different than our eyes do. In fact, our eyes aren't seeing light by themselves. They require our brain to interpret what the eye sees. So very similar to that, I have to interpret what the camera sees and render it so that it actually looks real. If I'm not adjusting white balance and exposure and contrast, then the shadow areas end up being really dark, the skies end up being too bright, it just doesn't look realistic. My style is also really colorful, and to get that kind of color, you have to have a perfect, even exposure. So to get an even exposure, there's a few different techniques I use. I use a lot of graduated neutral density filters when I'm shooting. So it's essentially sunglasses that go down over part of the lens, and it'll darken in a bright sky, which allows the detail and the color in the foreground to come out. If I can't use a neutral density filter because I'm shooting into the sun and I get too much flare, then I'll shoot an exposure bracket where I have one picture that's dark, one that's lighter, and one that's even lighter. And I'll blend those three photos in Photoshop to make the exposure even. I always do my very best to get the color, the contrast, and the exposure as good as I can in camera. And then I'll make my final adjustments in Lightroom. Also, because I like to print my photographs really large, like 4 feet by 8 feet is my biggest size, which is a huge photograph, I need my pictures to be very sharp and high detail. So a lot of people assume that that means a very expensive camera, but the truth is it has more to do with your shooting techniques and your lenses. So I shoot only with high quality Canon lenses. I try to use fixed focal length lenses when I can because they're sharper. And I always shoot around f8, which is the sharpest part of the lens. Now for a landscape photo where you have very close subjects and things way in the distance, you traditionally would shoot at a small aperture like f16 or f22 to get good depth of field. Well, you shoot at f16 and you lose your image quality. So what I do is a technique called focus stacking, where I shoot at f8, which gives me the best image quality, and I take a series of photos where first I focus up close, and then a little further back, and then into the distance. And then I'll merge those photos together in Photoshop using the sharpest part of each image. So essentially, I get this great depth of field while keeping the image quality I need to blow these photos up and have them look amazing. Speaking of Photoshop, some people look at my photos and think that I've altered the colors or used some sort of a filter. As I'm shooting in the field, I'm adjusting for white balance, contrast, and saturation, but I never add color that's not there or fundamentally change the image. My goal is for it to look very realistic. So I really am limited about what I will do with Photoshop. I'll use Photoshop to combine brackets, to do focus stacking. I'll use it to remove distracting elements. So say there's like a trail sign or a hiker or a stick. I will remove things with Photoshop, but I will never add anything. I will never change the sky to a sky from a different day. I don't Photoshop my photos, but I do use it as a tool to make little tweaks and changes that help create these images that have this feeling of perfection that represents the perfection of nature. This purple pre-sunrise photo is a good example of, if you were actually there, it would not look this purple because it was actually very dark. But I cranked up the ISO and I'm doing a longer exposure to bring out the brightness. So if you were there, it's probably pretty dark, but this color is actually in the sky. This is about 45 minutes before the sunrise. It's called the blue hour, when only the short wavelengths of light, the blues and the purples, are bouncing around in the atmosphere. So sometimes I get lucky and I can get a photo pretty easy, but a lot of the times I have to work really hard to get the photos I do. This photograph of Mount Baker at Iceberg Lake actually took me 10 years to figure out the right timing of. It's called Iceberg Lake because there's ice covering it all through the summer and it doesn't melt off all the way till the very end of the season. So this picture is actually taken on October 15th. And that time of year, the sun only hits the side of the mountain until about 10:30 in the morning. So to get there in time, I had to start hiking in the dark in 40-degree weather to make the 4-mile hike in to be there by 10 o'clock and figure out the right spot, get set up, and get this photo. The other times I've photographed this spot, there's either been ice on the lake or the sun has gone off the mountain and Mount Baker is just a cold blue mountain in front of a blue sky, and it doesn't pop the way the white does off the blue background. The huge bonus of this being a fall photograph is the red huckleberry leaves in the foreground, which are backlit by the sun, that just glow in the foreground and really round out the composition. I've been doing digital photography for over 18 years, after over 12 years of doing film photography. So there's more than 30 years of experience and technique going into each of the images that I create. As I'm shooting, my goal is to be so present and so connected with the landscape that I become aligned and intertwined with the mind of nature, and let the artwork come through me as a true collaboration with nature itself. My gallery is located in the Fairhaven district of Bellingham, Washington, 90 miles north of Seattle. I invite you to stop by to see over 50 of my most popular photographs and enjoy the sweeping views out over the Bellingham Bay. One thing we do that's super unique to our gallery is we help people decide what photo and what size their photo should be by doing mock-ups. So you can send us a photo of your wall and we'll Photoshop in the photographs at different sizes and with the different images so you can see what looks best on your wall. It's sometimes really hard to know exactly what you want until you see it. So the only thing you have to do is when you email that photo in, tape a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper to the wall, and that gives us a size reference. So we know if this is 8.5 by 11, this is what a 30 by 60 would look like, this is what a 40 by 60 looks like, here's what a 40 by 80 looks like, here's what a 4 by 6 would look like, here's what a 4 by 8 would look like. It makes it so much easier to make a decision when you really know exactly what it's gonna look like. If you'd like to see my entire collection of photographs, you can go to peterjamesfotogallery.com, where you can browse by subject, or use the filters to select vertical or horizontal, standard or panorama, and even filter by color. When you find a photo you like, click the heart icon to add it to your favorites list, and use that list to narrow down your selections. In our modern civilization, we've really built walls between us and nature. But now we can use those very same walls to bring nature inside our homes and businesses so that we can enjoy it every day, no matter what the weather is like. We're living in a time when we need nature in our daily lives more than ever. And I truly hope that these pictures inspire you, uplift you, and help you feel more connected with nature.